Now, the Prime Minister Scott Morrison made a brave call on the submarines project. I'm afraid those probably going to cave on global warming. You've got so many activists, journalists and corporations, going green, they're trying to be holier than thou. You've got to have net zero, Prime Minister. You've got to cut our emissions and have far more wind and solar power. A lot of that bullying, by the way, now is coming from Europe ahead of this Glasgow summit later on this year. But look what happened in Europe this week. The wind suddenly stopped. And electricity prices around the continent went through the roof. There was a big jump in Germany, for instance. That's the dark line on the graphic we'll show you there. And look at the absolute massive jump in prices in Britain. That's the green line. Britain even had to pay huge money to the last few coal-fired power stations to just please keep going, at least keep on the lights, like wind power suddenly wasn't. Now, joining me is a man who gave evidence this week to a House of Lords inquiry into global warming policies, the switch to net zero, which the Morrison government's under pressure to agree to too. John Constable is the Energy Director of the Global Warming Policy Foundation, and he joins me from London. John Constable, thank you so much for your time. The wind stopped blowing this week. How unusual was this, and what did it lead to?
Yes, well, it's not that unusual. In fact, there's a temptation for analysts to say that this is a perfect storm, giving the impression that it's something really quite unusual and a coincidence. In fact, this is now quite standard for us. High prices in an electricity market are rather like temperature in a human body. They're an indication of problems. Now, short temperature fluctuations in the human body, no problem. Short price fluctuations in the market, no problem. But we're seeing chronic, high sustained prices for long periods. And this is an indication of an underlying health condition in the UK electricity and indeed in the energy sector more broadly. I'm briefly speaking, we're not in the best of health.
Now, this wind actually stopped almost like continent-wide. It hit Britain in particular. You've had now coal-fired power stations having to, pump out the power, never mind the planet anymore. What is the whole moral of this story?
The moral of the story is that you should listen to the engineers. Engineers have been telling us for a very long period of time that sustained periods of low wind and geographically extended low wind conditions over the whole of Europe would be a problem. And we've been told this for decades now. Politicians, I'm afraid, listen to lobbying from the renewables industry, who say that everything would be all right on the night. Well, we're now beginning to see that that's not true, and that, in fact, it's extremely costly to manage a system with this much renewable energy. I mean, in physical terms, what we've done is we introduced a very large stochastic random element into our electricity supply, and managing that proves, big surprise to no one really who understands these things, it proves to be very, very expensive indeed. As you said, yesterday, the remaining elements of coal in the UK were actually doing sterling work, propping us up. And one of them, which also burns a great deal of biomass and is subsidised for doing it, one of those stations turned on its two remaining coal units, made £10 million at prices at nearly £4,000 a megawatt hour. These are extremely high prices by any standard.
Now, one thing that saves Britain's bacon, of course, you can, posture, or your country can posture about net zero and all this kind of thing, is you've got a giant extension cord running to the nuclear power stations of France and also some of the coal-fired power stations in Germany that are remaining. So they can bail you out in times like this when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine or whatever. We don't have that luxury. And we're under a lot of pressure to go net zero, make a net zero promise at Glasgow in the conference there later this year. Now, I'm just wondering, is this a smart thing for us to do? You've given evidence on net zero. What would you recommend?
If I were the British Prime Minister, I wouldn't be lecturing Australians on how to manage your energy supply. You should be securing that and using engineering principles appropriate to your own needs. You can do this. There's no reason. It's none of our business to tell you how to run your energy supply. You shouldn't look at our example positively. It's very discouraging. We are, as you say, an islanded system, essentially, with extended interconnections to the continent. Well, that that security supply guarantee from the interconnectors is now looking very weak. Yesterday, there was a major fire at the main interconnector to France, which is now out of action. And this is not entirely surprising. You shouldn't rely on interconnectors to run your system. Times of need, they will tend to absent themselves to protect their own equipment. And on this occasion, an accident, possibly caused by improper use or just general stressing, because we're running the system in a very strange way, may have caused this fire. We don't yet know what caused the fire on the interconnector was, but it's certainly making things very difficult today. And anybody who's interested in what a green electricity system looks like can watch the UK's information on a minute-by-minute basis, look and learn. Australia should be much more careful about this than we have been, would be my message.
Well, I'm afraid, though, a religious spasm has grabbed Australia by the throat, and I don't know whether we're going to see reason here. At least we now have nuclear submarines coming, if only we had a nuclear power industry as well. But there you go. We are a bit crazy that way. John Constable, thank you so much for your time.